Okay, while we're waiting for people to get their coffees and come back in, maybe we can just get started with the introduction to the session. Good morning, colleagues. It's my privilege to welcome you to session 2.4, Advancing Renewable Energy Integration. Um, I just wanted to quickly thank the organizers for the platform and for pulling together this session. So, as countries across Asia and the Pacific accelerate the deployment of renewable energy, integrating variable sources like solar and wind presents both immense opportunities and challenges. Enhancing grid stability, improving market design, deploying energy storage solutions at scale, and ensuring regional coordination are just some of the interventions that are essential to unlocking the full potential of renewables and achieving a just and resilient energy transition. So my name is Adrata Subaya. I work for the Southeast Asia Energy Transition Partnership, or ETP. We're a program of UNOPS. We're a pooled fund of governments and philanthropies, and we're working to support countries in Southeast Asia with their energy transition journeys. We do this by working across four strategic objectives, and I always find it very useful to frame any discussions in this sector around those objectives. The first one is around policy, so essentially aligning policy and regulation with climate commitments. The second is on financing, so how do we de-risk investments in renewable energy, energy efficiency, and fossil fuel phase out? And the third one is on supporting grid modernization for RE integration, and we've recently added one on just transition. So if you've not already picked it up, today's topic aligns very closely with our third strategic objective, grid modernization, which has been something that has been a key priority for us as we've expanded our work in the region, and something that we really see growing as a priority for our governments in Southeast Asia. So some examples include in the Philippines and Vietnam, we have worked on developing a smart grid roadmap. In Indonesia, we've helped modernize the Java Mudra Bali control centers, allowing for greater integration of renewables and managing flexibility. At the ASEAN level, we have supported the development of a roadmap for multilateral power trade. We're also currently supporting technical studies which will address regulatory frameworks, grid codes, and technical standards that are essential for power trade integration. We'll also soon launch a school of regulation to support sustained capacity building for greater cooperation and harmonization, an essential foundation for regional power trade. So this is just a flavor of all of the things that are happening at the ASEAN level and just things that ETP is working on. Of course, there are multiple other players who are in the room here today. So some of the challenges that we've seen through our work in the ASEAN region, which are familiar in other regions as well, and which will kind of help frame the session today, is grid infrastructure limitations. So many Southeast Asian countries are outdated and centralized in terms of their grids, making it difficult to integrate decentralized renewable energy sources. Existing infrastructure lacks flexibility to handle renewable energy's variability, leading to instability and a lot of energy wastage as well. Energy storage and firming challenges. So the variability of renewable energy sources like solar and wind requires effective storage, but the limited deployment of solutions like BESS hinders grid stability and reliable 24/7 renewable energy supply. We continue to see regulatory and policy barriers. So inconsistent or outdated regulations across the region prevent effective renewable energy integration. They create uncertainty for investors and make it difficult to implement things like hybrid systems and energy storage technologies. We continue to see limited regional coordination and cross-border integration, so there's slow progress. The APG ambition has been around since the 1980s. And there still remain a lot of political, technical, and regulatory obstacles to achieving its ambition. So that brings us to our session. So through this session, we will hear from the experts. We'll hear practical strategies to manage intermittency, strengthen system flexibility, and enable cross-border collaboration. So our speakers today bring a diverse set of experiences. We have Jens Rottenhauser, the head of advisory Dornier Group, who will be talking about utility scale BESS deployment in Uzbekistan to stabilize grid integration in a centralized system. We have Sonal Agarwal, Associate Partner, Renewables and Energy Transition from EY, Partnerships for Infrastructure, who will be taking us to Sarawak to talk about storage-led innovations there. We have Philip Napier-Moore, Energy Sector Lead from McDonald, and we'll be learning about lessons from Singapore and RE import initiatives that support ASEAN's evolving ambition on firmed renewables. And we also have Nashwin Rodriguez, Senior Energy Analyst from Ember, who will be walking us through some of India's modeling-based approaches for de-risking 24/7 renewables for industrial consumers specifically. Okay, so for that, I would like to call the first speaker onto stage, please. Jens Rodenhaus is an environmental engineer and the head of advisory services at Dornier Sunchance with over 2 decades of experience in advancing renewable energy infrastructure. He is a leading expert in solar PV and hybrid power systems, having successfully guided numerous high-profile projects across Central and Southeast Asia. Jens, if you can please join us on stage.
We are still waiting for the clicker for the presentation, if you don't mind. Thank you. Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks, Lang, of course, for the opportunity to speak today. Thanks to ADB, and also many thanks for the kind introduction, Adita. I'm going to present some insights from ADB project, which was conducted in Uzbekistan. Project is under implementation, and I'm also going to relate to similar projects that have been that are on their way. Thanks a lot. That are on their way nowadays in Cambodia. So what I'm trying to outline, and that was already included in the introduction, was some keywords such as grid stabilization, BESS integration, and grid modernization, and implementing BESS systems, centralized BESS systems in the grids here in the countries are exactly facing these issues. We are trying to address these topics, but we are facing a couple of issues. Just key facts about the project. Project is located in Uzbekistan in Guzar district. It's a 300 megawatt PV plant with a co-location of a 75 megawatt hours. BESS, it's connected to a local substation, and that's all I'm going to talk about this project. I'm more interested in what we have seen there. And just to make sure that we're all on the same page, quick wrap up or recapitulation. What is the role of the BESS here? Here, the BESS takes the role of as a critical component of the modern energy infrastructure in providing flexibility in terms of storage and also limiting fluctuations from the BESS and the generated energy there. And the storage battery here is also used for grid support services. That's at least the idea. And now looking into the BESS capabilities, and I'm now not taking you all through all these slides. I'm going to wrap up this pretty quickly. Let's take it as a vendor's technical advertisement leaflet. So what kind of services can a battery basically deliver? Most important, and where we see BESS commonly used, is peak shaving and load shifting, basically storing energy during daytime when connected to solar and discharging this energy to the grid or injecting to the grid during evening hours. And then we can go through what else is possible. We can talk about energy arbitrage in case the market has the maturity, the ability, so that we can go for buying energy cheap and selling it when energy is more expensive. We can go for frequency regulation, voltage support, power smoothing, plague start capabilities. You can see there are a lot of things you can do with the battery. And I've even left out another 4 or 5 points. And this is the moment when I'm going to stop on this. And because the issue here is there are a lot of opportunities you can address with integrating a BESS, but there are technical and contractual limitations to actually do so. So taking the grid perspective and now looking into the grid of Uzbekistan, and similarities can be found in quite a number of countries here in the region. So the topology of the grid is predominantly traditionally relying on centralized components. So we have large-scale generation, we have distribution grids from those large-scale generations towards the consumers, and energy is distributed centrally. Um, we frequently see dispatch and control systems being in place which are not fully digitalized, and instructions are sometimes even communicated via email, messenger services, or phone. And so the limited digitalization restricts the full utilization of BESS, because BESS is very quick and fast in responding, and that would require also quick dispatch instructions. And the digitalization of distribution grids, that's was discussed in several sessions here throughout the last days. That's definitely an issue which we're also seeing in the Uzbek grid. Particularly in this project, we have a flexible gas and CCGT plant, which is able to provide the frequency regulation, as well as the voltage regulation, and also reactive power provision. As a result, it makes the inclusion of the BESS less favorable. And technically, also the grid code lacks specification how BESS shall be integrated. So we see both regulatory and technical constraints, and also the technical setup of the grid is limiting the use cases for the BESS. And the last point, which is quite important, there's a lack of data, a lack of knowledge. So without suitable data from the grid about consumption patterns and other informations, it's also difficult to size BESS suitable. And we also have to think about how much money putting we are into BESS, how much money we are investing in these projects to have an efficient investment. So grid side, there are a couple of issues. Looking now at the other side, on the contractual side, because the BESS here in this project was implemented via a PPA, and we also have to take the perspective of the private partner. And coming back to this limited databases, it's difficult to describe the use case in advance, so it's also difficult to anticipate all use cases, all operational situations in the PPA, making drafting of the PPA quite complex, as well as making it complex to set up the financial model when going for bidding processes. Typical tariff structures which would be required for the ancillary services such as frequency stabilization, provision of reactive power, and others which I've mentioned before are not available. In these cases, the PPA needs to provide the floor, the contractual basis to provide such services. What has been done in the project in Uzbekistan? Here we have, for the refinancing of the BESS, it's linked to availability payments. So simplifying, the BESS is paid or repaid for its sheer existence. We have no payment in this PPA which is linked to utilization of the battery, as there was no framework to do so. And in absence of these market-based mechanisms, of course, you also have to consider how to do the refinancing, and you also could consider alternative strategies such as viability gap fundings, government support mechanisms, or climate funding, which were not applied in these projects, but which we are seeing being discussed in other projects. That's the reason why I'm also was taking reference to Cambodia in that context. If we continue along these lines, and also that's quite frequent discussion which we have with our legal colleagues or the legal advisors in these projects, that there is a constant trade-off between the detailed mechanisms I would like to see in their PPAs, and on the other side, the high uncertainties with regards to the operational regime and the technical parameters. Accordingly, technical, legal, as well as utility, they need to find a smooth and an adjusted balance between all the different interests, taking into account the current infrastructure and its current technical state, as well as the future developments, seeing upcoming digitalization and other developments. In addition, there are also a couple of technical issues that should be mentioned here. When we look into operational lifetime, when we're looking into degradation topics, all these issues need to be addressed or explicitly excluded to shape a PPA that's working for both parties. and the same requires then detailed definition of a testing regime. What are the typical approaches to this? And we're coming back to the data gap. Typical approach from the engineering side, and I'm speaking as an engineer to you, so sorry for taking that reference, would be simulation. Without data, simulations are pretty difficult. So finding the sweet spot, the right setup, the right sizing of battery is a difficult topic here. Conclusions from what I would try to convey here is integrating a BESS still provides a proper challenge for the involved experts, and this includes the legal, the technical, and financial background. And we need to shape solutions which are suitable for today's application and today's technical infrastructure, as well as to be fit for future applications for BESS. We need to take into consideration the continued grid development and the reinforcement that are expected. Here we have to talk about, in particular, about the digitalization. And it's the task of all participants to navigate the project, the BESS, and the overall system between those different constraints and the different legal aspects. Of course, supportive policies are important to play here in favor of the projects and also updating the policies within the countries. That's all for today. I hope I was able to give you a quick insight in what has happened in the Uzbekistan project, and happy to take your questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Jens. Thank you for being well within time. Okay, now we have Sonal Agarwal joining us next. So Sonal is an associate partner in EY's energy transition team based in Singapore, where she's a key figure in shaping Southeast Asia's renewable energy future. She serves as a financial advisor, guiding both public and private sector clients through complex energy transition projects. Sonal, if I can invite you onto stage, please.
Good morning, everyone. Let me start by congratulating ADB on the 20th year of Asia Clean Energy Forum, and also thanking ADB and the organizers for having me here to speak on this important topic. As Adrita introduced me, I'm Sonal. I'm part of EY Singapore Strategy and Transactions team, leading on renewables and energy transition. I work with both government and private sector clients, and as my role within my role at EY, I'm also working on Partnerships for Infrastructure program of the Australian government. Let me tell you a little bit more about the program. P4I is an Australian government initiative partnering with Southeast Asia counterparts to drive sustainable, inclusive, and resilient growth in infrastructure sectors, covering across transport, energy, and telecom. The program started in 2020 and has been working with various Southeast Asian counterparts across regulators, private sector, infrastructure operators, and utilities in the region. The program supports technical policy and regulation to build a pipeline of investable projects and attract quality financing to enhance infrastructure productivity. The program is led by DFAT, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Australia, and is delivered by a few consortium partners, including EY, which is where I work, the Asia Foundation, Adam Smith International, and NT1. As part of the program, we are supporting Sarawak Energy Board on understanding the role of energy storage systems in Sarawak's energy future, and I'll talk a little bit about that in my slides. I am happy that there is a consensus amongst the industry that the share of renewables will keep on increasing from here. There is no turning back. That's a global trend, and it is followed in ASEAN, which also means there will be an increasing need for storage to manage the intermittencies issues coming out of variable renewable energy. So renewable energy coming from geothermal, hydro, etc., hasn't faced that requirement, but because we have now variable intermittent energy coming from solar, wind, there is an excessive need of storage to think about. the share of renewables will look different compared to different scenarios. So here what I have is from the eighth energy outlook of ASEAN, but this will completely depend on national ambition of each market, resource availability, enabling policy and regulatory framework, their transmission and other infrastructure upgrades, and not to forget the financing and investment climate. Energy storage. So sorry, Jens, I'm, I think, overlapping with your slides here, but there is, apart from normal arbitrage, which is considered as the most commercial use of storage, that you buy low and sell high, there are many other use of storage. And the use of storage is governed by the electricity market framework of why do you need this, whether it is a generation asset or is a transmission asset. You use it for transmission network support, or do you use it to match and smoothen your supply? You use it for peak shaving and things like that. A bit of it, which Jens showed you, so this completely overlaps there. But what I'm trying to say here is the use of storage is important for every kind of market. Even a self-sufficient market might need storage to enhance grid stability or to act as a battery for its neighboring, and which we'll talk about subsequently of how this would play a critical role in the energy future of ASEAN as a whole. Looking at technologies and type of storage options, so broadly could be categorized across 4 groups of thermal, mechanical, electrochemical, and electrical storage. There are various technologies under each of these types which are prominently being deployed. So we are most familiar ones to all of us that we hear now commonly are pump hydro energy storage, the batteries, and hydrogen. So just fundamentally thinking about fossil fuels could generate power at the time of your need. We can't do the same with variable renewables, solar and wind. They are not always sun is not always shining, wind is not always blowing, right? And not at times when the power is needed. So there's a need to now store that power instead of storing the fossil fuels. Secondly, fossil fuels could be transported from one place to another. So you could move resources from one geography to another, which is not, again, the case with renewables. So innovation is finding ways to store electricity or to even move it in form that can be deployed into electricity, for example, hydrogen. So a lot of innovation will lead into solving the problems that come with the goodness of renewables in a way. You cannot generate like fossil fuel, you cannot move like fossil fuel, so batteries will play that role on solving that equation. Pump hydro has been the most popular technology and is the most widely accepted and deployed technology because it's proven, it's scalable off the shelf, it's low carbon, it's domestically available, and it is cost effective in the long run. It could have a lifetime of 50 to 100 years and can act as a backup, could act as a long-term storage, could act as short-term storage, depending on, again, the need of the market. Here I'm trying to present some of the more popular and commercialized technologies. I have friends in the audience and more technical experts who would say, oh, we have far moved from these numbers, so do not hold me to these numbers. But what I'm trying to say and make a point is all of these technologies are at different scale of commercialization, and with pump hydro being the most advanced. Of course, hydrogen being the most popular right now in the region for private sector. Looking a little bit closer into pump hydro, and why I say that, because the entire region is very rich in pump hydro resources. So Asia should be proud that's leading the game on pump hydro storage, with 4 Asian countries appearing in the top 10 deployed capacity, led by China. But across the region, and I'll show you in the next few slides, we are so rich in pump hydro resources that we can cover 100% electricity future. ASEAN, like I said, has massive potential for pump hydro. And this gets shown and demonstrated very visually by Australian National University's atlas, which is publicly available. So if you're interested, you could go to ANU's website and look this atlas up, which provides you location of sites all along ASEAN by cost classification, nearest to transmission line, etc. So you could put your inputs in to the atlas and find out sites that are relevant to you. So the atlas works across greenfield sites, brownfield sites, and even bluefield sites, where you find existing reservoirs or mine sites that could now be converted into pump hydro energy storage solutions. So just to give you an idea, how pump hydro works is you need a lower reservoir and a higher reservoir. You fill the lower reservoir with water and you pump it up when you have solar generating or wind generating, to store it at the higher reservoir. And at the time of need, you run the water down and generate electricity similar to a hydro. Very quickly, zooming into Malaysia. So Malaysia has over 3,800 sites, which could support 200 times than the needed support for a 100% electricity future. So if I were to talk to experts, from a theory perspective, you have everything in place to deploy all the solar you want, all the wind you want, and use your pump hydro resources to make it a 100% functioning system. Like I said, is theory. A lot needs to be resolved before we, but this is more a vision and a outcome that is possible given the resource availability. A bit on Sarawak, and I think I have hit the time limit, is like whole of Malaysia and ASEAN, it is extremely rich in solar resources and existing hydropower resources. It's not only self-sufficient, but it is more than self-sufficient and can contribute to renewable energy future of the neighboring countries. So Sarawak is already talking about exporting to Indonesia, exporting to other parts of Malaysia, Singapore, and even southern Philippines. And it will leverage on its pump hydro resources, etc. So the P4I support that I had mentioned earlier about Sarawak Energy Board, we are helping them assess the storage needs that Sarawak would have, considering its energy planning and the future goals of exporting to the region. What kind of storage would be needed across technologies, from pump hydro to short-term battery storage, etc. And what is the optimal level that will help Sarawak keep prices attractive? So Sarawak has one of the lowest prices in the region and is dominated by hydro. So it's already, very well advanced on its green energy agenda. But now it's going further with the aim of supporting the region on utilizing this energy. So that's to the point of regional energy trade and the role countries like Sarawak or even Laos can play with their excessive hydropower potential, utilizing pump hydro and other options. I'll stop here and probably we can take questions during the discussion later. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Sonal. Okay, now we have Philip Napier-Moore, who is Mott MacDonald's energy sector lead for Asia, spearheading the group's regional efforts to support clients through the global energy transition. A chartered engineer and a fellow of the Energy Institute with over 20 years of experience across the energy value chain, he's been instrumental in developing utility-scale solar and wind power projects across 30 countries with a focus on Asia and Europe. Philip, over to you.
Thank you, and it's great to be here. I think I'm really glad I'm going third because this presentation builds very well on the last two, and it's a bit of a special case of what we've been talking about in the last two presentations. And I believe it's a kind of new tool in the toolbox of the energy transition for Southeast Asia, which hasn't yet been fully absorbed because it's so new. So I'm really interested to share it a bit today. On Mott MacDonald's, we're active in renewable generation, clean generation in the region. We have one of the largest teams active in the Asia region in this space, covering all different types of clean energy technology. But relevant to this talk, we're also very strong on power interconnection, subsea interconnection, which we do around the world, including in this part of the world. For example, with the Marinus link up, connecting Tasmania and Victoria, and some of the HVDC links in Japan. And what I'll be talking about here is within Southeast Asia. So what's the opportunity here? The IEA's 2023 report put a particular focus on how solar and onshore wind costs had come down so far that for 96% of new capacity globally, it was cheaper than fossil alternatives. So great milestone. Next milestone is, when does it become sufficiently cheap that firmed renewables become cheaper than fossil power, right? Because it's subject to a maximum grid penetration limit otherwise, as we've heard in the previous slides, right? So we saw that you can address these limits of intermittency with storage and with interconnection with other solutions, right? So point number 4 on the screen there is that we are now seeing examples, and I'll share the case study of with solar with BESS is becoming competitive with mid-merit coal. Now, what do we mean by mid-merit? So we have intermittent renewables, we have base load at the far end, maybe dispatching 90% of the year. And then we have mid-merit, something in the middle, maybe 50 to 80% kind of dispatch rate. Now that is a difficult target for renewables, firmed renewables in the past. Like, just as an illustration, if you see a battery that's less than the size of the installed capacity of the renewable generation, that is not going to be mid-merit yet. You need a big battery generally. If you see smaller batteries, they're doing those other things that we heard about: ancillary services, ramp rate control, smoothing, but they're not giving you a kind of solution that is filling more than half the hours of the day with a firm dispatch, right? So mid-merit is a new milestone. And there's plenty of demand for it, not only from ASEAN governments, but from RE100 companies and from resource companies that need to export into the EU through the EU carbon border and need clean energy to do that, clean, firm energy. And I'll come on also towards the end more to this picture of cross-border exports and the role of pump storage. So this is a case study that hopefully everyone has heard of. But if you haven't, here's the opportunity to tell you about it. So this is the Terra Solar project in the Philippines. It's 3.5 gigawatts of solar, 4.5 gigawatt hours of storage to create 850 megawatts of firm export. So firm is roughly 50% of the hours of the year, concentrated in periods of high demand on the weekdays, right? So this, we started getting involved in this about 5 years ago, when the best price was multiples of the current price. And we were like, really? but it got there. And for any doubters, just over a month ago, it did complete financial close, $2.7 billion of local bank financing here in the Philippines. It's currently under construction. Groundbreaking was last December. We helped with the initial design and the procurement of the EPC contractor. So I think this is a huge development. Like, it's 3,500 hectares, right? That's been compared by the owners to the size of Pasig City. For those of you who are not from Manila, you just cross the ADB Avenue over there and head towards Laguna Lake, about 6 kilometers, that kind of area, huge part of the city, right? So, there's obviously technical challenges about how you design this, but actually probably the more significant challenge is how do you roll it out this quickly, right? And that's energy transition is about speed. How do we build this? It's 160 megawatts per month. That's more than 3 times the maximum rate we've ever seen achieved anywhere else in the world in terms of PV rollout. It's the size of a city, right? So the site-wide infrastructure design, the transport logistics, parallel work by different contractors, it's complex. I think the owners have said that they're expecting up to 20,000 workers on site, right? So clear challenges, but also a great opportunity that this is now competitive with fossil power, firmed renewables, right? Now I'm going to move on to what if we pair that with interconnection. So those of you who have been following the EMA tenders, the Singapore Energy Market Authority, there's been 9 projects now given a concessional award or a concessional license to import power to Singapore from neighbors via subsea cables, right? 7 of those are in Indonesia from the Riau Islands. And so the concept is essentially, in all of these cases, is solar and battery on the left, subsea cable in the middle, and bringing in at high voltage into Singapore. And so there'll be various cable routes, 7 different routes up from Indonesia based on the current concessional awards, taking different paths, coming into Singapore. So I'm going to talk collectively. We're involved in a few of these, but I'll talk collectively about the challenge and the opportunity that they represent. So again, just focusing on those projects coming up from Indonesia, because the ones coming from the Mekong, much more complicated and long-term projects with HVDC connections. These are HVAC connections, generally less than 100 kilometers. You can do it with a reasonable lead time, up to a kind of 2030 target. So 3.4 gigawatts of imports have been awarded firm dispatch. Originally awarded at a 75% capacity factor. So for 3/4 of the hours of the year, you would be getting 3.4 gigawatts of power coming into Singapore across these cables. There are some challenges here around constrained subsea corridors. It's one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world around Singapore. It's a very active coastal landscape with a lot of development and reclamation. Bringing in those cables, finding grid interconnection points is a complicated jigsaw. There's also the requirement on the Indonesian side that the PV modules and the batteries are manufactured in Indonesia. So that requires an unprecedented scaling up of local manufacturing capacity in Indonesia, which is a challenge and an opportunity. Building this much solar, and we'll come on to the next slide of how much exactly in parallel, will be a big strain on regional supply chains, both in terms of manpower, but also if we think about the offshore cables, which are already constrained by offshore wind, very complex. Also worth noting that these projects are all on isolated islands, so you have to build a whole new kind of infrastructure for import of equipment. You're going to have thousands of containers a day. It's like a mid-sized port, effectively, collectively across these projects. We have to build it, bring new equipment in, regardless of kind of tidal and weather conditions. So challenges there. And last, but by no means least, is finding that right balance between power stability and power affordability. And that's really where I want to focus the slides on today. So here's a graph, trying to keep it as simple as possible. This is solar capacity and BESS capacity. And if we look at different possible load factors, so how many hours per year we're bringing power at a stable level into Singapore, what does that mean for how much solar and battery we install, right? So this is not, again, to re-emphasize, we're not talking about any kind of ancillary services. We're literally talking about moving solar power generated during the day into the evening and the night and giving a stable output, right? Now, at the lower end of the scale here, around a 40% capacity factor, you can actually have BESS lower than PV, but you wouldn't really call that mid-merit, right? 50%, about a third of the way along is what the Terra Solar project is doing, and you can see there the BESS comes above the PV. And over, if we go to 75%, then we end up with 2-3 times the amount of BESS than the solar. Now, I think I want to, so there's different options here, and clearly the more BESS you put in, the higher cost, right? So the higher cost, if you want it to be more firm, it comes at a higher price, right? I won't go into the costs because they're changing so fast, right? The battery costs are coming down so fast, and that's part of the opportunity that's created. But I do want to point to just the absolute numbers that we're talking about here. We're talking about deploying between 14 and 28 gigawatts of solar just to provide a portion of Singapore's renewable energy ambitions, right? That's more than the solar currently installed across the whole of ASEAN that will be, pardon me, installed within the next 5 years just to supply Singapore, right? If we talk about the BESS, we don't even have in ASEAN the amount of BESS on the lower end of the scale. So this is a massive scale up in manufacturing supply chains and an opportunity for other parts of ASEAN to deploy a solution that is now cost competitive and to build a supply chain around it. I think that's the key point. My time is up, but I will just put on screen some of the wider implications for the ASEAN energy transformation. So clearly, putting this kind of solution into the mix changes optimal power flows between countries. It's a quicker solution than pump storage hydro, so you can deploy it quicker, but pump storage hydro has to be in the mix as well. If you put all that together, what does it mean about where the optimal connections are and how you size them? I think that's the interesting point. Okay, thank you. I look forward to questions later.
Thank you, Philip. Okay, and last but not least, we have Nashwin Rodriguez. Nashwin is a key member of EMBA's data-led research team, specializing in providing data-driven insights to support decision-making for India's electricity sector's transition to renewable energy. His work includes contributing to policy research and cost effective supply side pathways, and he's actively engaged with states and distribution utilities across India to plan for this critical transition. Nashwin, over to you.
Thanks for the introduction, and I thank the organizers for having me here. Uh, so today I'll be talking about the the topic of my presentation is enabling investment flows in 24/7 RE projects and for the industrial category of consumers in India. Now, why am I going to such a niche? I'll just touch upon that. I'll give you a brief overview of what's happening when it comes to RE procurement through corporate power purchase agreements in India. But before that, if you see the figure on the left, you see that India has added a lot of renewables in recent years. Uh, and a big portion of the solar that was added in 2024 actually went to C&I consumers through corporate power purchase agreements. Put some number on this, out of the 20 odd gigawatts that was added for solar in 2024, around 35% of that goes to went to C&I consumers. So uh, C&I consumption of solar in particular is very important to India's renewable growth story. And why has this happened in recent years? One is because of the cost competitiveness of this, right? It is very cost competitive for industrial consumers in India to buy directly from generators instead of buying from utilities. And this has been made possible through a mechanism called open access. I know it varies across states, but overall it's quite attractive, especially for larger commercial and industrial consumers. Secondly, the renewable purchase obligation mandates, if taken seriously, industries would have to meet almost 40% of their electricity needs by 2030 from renewables, right? And that is also seen as another driver. But a lot of corporates subscribe to much higher ESG commitments, and some subscribe to the RE100 charter as well. So the growth for this sector, is quite strong. And even if you look at these figures, these are just for the hard to habit sectors where electricity consumption is actually lower. The growth potential remains quite strong. And electrification and certain, maturing of certain technologies will only add an upside to our estimates on this. Okay, so now let's get to the discussion of increasing renewable share. So I think a lot of the earlier presenters also mentioned this. As you increase the penetration of renewables, you need some amount of storage investments. And as a consumer that increases its share of renewables, storage investments are going to be needed, right? Especially for consumers who are looking at RE100 goals. And this is also true for the grid. I mean, if you look at what has happened in the grid, this is the hourly source-wise generation for a typical day in May 2019 and 2025. Right? You look at the bulge there. Right? It's amazing of what has happened in the last few years. But the effect of this on the wholesale electricity market, right, is quite alarming. If you look at the prices during solar hours, they have kind of crashed in a way, and this is a topic of discussion in India, right? And if this happens, especially for plain vanilla or only solar projects that are linked in some way to the market, you might have a significant reduction in the flow of investments. And why am I talking about link to the market? I'll just touch upon that in the next couple of slides. So yeah, as consumers think of increasing their share from say around 50% to reaching somewhere around 24/7 RE, uh, the balancing is going to get complicated. And this is not just because of the diurnal nature of say solar, but also because of the uncertainty associated to it, right? Secondly, the costs are going to increase significantly. And finally, which is like the main area topic of my presentation, is that the risks in these projects are significantly higher. Uh, yeah, so yeah, balancing gets complicated because of all sorts of reasons. But if you look at the cost, I think this is one of the biggest drivers when it came to uptake of RE by industrial and commercial category. There's the cost competitiveness. But the moment you go from say 50%, which we what I think is optimal today, and so there were questions on this figure in a previous presentation. So this is particularly for an Indian commercial and industrial consumer. We see that wind is not playing a big role in this, particularly because wind generation is concentrated in a few months of the year. But as you move from 50% to something like a 24/7, we see anywhere between a 2.5 to up to a 5x increase in costs, right, per unit of electricity. Uh, and that range depends on the level of reliability. If you want a very reliable 24/7, supply, you got to oversize. You got to oversize your generation. You got to oversize your storage. But with the drastic storage or battery cost declines, I think for a lot of consumers going forward, especially for consumers who are buying from utilities in states that have a relatively higher tariff, or where economic considerations or financial considerations are not that important, we might see an uptake of such projects. But we are not seeing this at the moment. Uh, but yeah, I think with storage cost declines, we might see this happening. But one issue that kind of still remains is the risks associated to these projects. Uh, and the reason for this is that a very common strategy for meeting a 24/7 demand profile, 24/7 RE supplying a demand, is that you turn to oversizing, right? You oversize the battery, and you, more importantly, you oversize the generation. And because of this, what happens, if you see the figure on the right, you're left with a lot of over generation, which you have to sell somewhere, right? You have to sell somewhere, and it would likely be sold in the wholesale electricity market, arguably at rates much lower than the PPA rate, right? So if you're looking at like 100% RE, and you're depending on a market for your revenue, you're exposed to market risks, which is what we're kind of talking about here, right? So the figure on the left, you see the estimated revenue had these type of projects been there in these years, right? There is already an inherent market volatility which you're exposed to. Like a big portion of your total electricity sales are exposed to that market volatility. But also, as we are increasingly seeing in India, you could be exposed to price cannibalization risk in solar, because solar is injecting so much power during the day. You have price crashes in some months, uh, which leads to our solution. Yeah, so this is a study that we've done for FDRE projects. They are not 24/7 projects. They have some level of storage. But yeah, power market price risks are probably the biggest risks in these projects today. Uh, so yeah, this comes to our solution. What do we do, right? All this is once all this is said and done, we need better tools, right? We need better tools to estimate risks for such projects. We need better tools to identify what the optimal capacity is. How much wind, how much solar, how much battery. What is the best combination to meet certain demand profile? And we need more pilots to start the learning curve. So this acts as examples for other projects to follow in the future. So this is it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nashwin. Can I now invite all the panelists onto stage, please, for a quick round of discussion? And I encourage everyone to please use the Wova app to input any questions. And then, of course, we do have a mic available as well for those who are brave enough to ask them out loud. You can set, that's fine. Okay, so maybe I'll just use my privilege as the moderator to kick us off with a question. So I wanted to really talk about the role of storage in regional integration. So we've seen some examples of how, BESS, for example, is unlocking grid flexibility. But my question is more around how do we move towards regionally aligned technical standards and business models that will then support storage at scale and that potential of, regional interconnection in the future as well. Maybe Jens, if you want to start, or Phil.
Oh, we're starting with the tough one. Thanks. Now, coming from a European background, the beauty in Europe is that we are able to connect different markets, different grids with each other. I am, of course, aware that this is not the situation here in the Asian region, but nevertheless, I'm strongly convinced that the key to unlocking or the real potential of renewable energies is combining technologies. So what we just heard, just looking back on the 4 presentations which we have just seen, it's really about combining technologies. The last presentation which we're listening to we're heavily leaning towards BESS storage actually. So just consider combining BESS storage with water storage, which Sonam was talking about, and integrating also storage, power supply from several countries. That's really the key to addressing the question of how can we balance the generation and the storage, and how we can get lower costs for our industries as well as for any consumer that are dependent on power supply.
Yeah, so it is a tricky question, but I'll give it a go. So I think we can obviously see there's been a long-term ambition to develop the ASEAN grid. And I think the falling cost of renewables, whether you're using that to charge a pump storage, or whether you're using that to charge a battery, creates a different set of economics around that now. The differences in the renewable resource and the topographical resource, or the pump storage resource of different countries, drives an economic requirement for integration that wasn't there to the same degree before, right? So you can now go green cheaper by interconnecting with your neighbors, right? And that hasn't really been the case before. Now, I think the Singapore import projects are a really nice case because they're moving. They're happening anyway. They're driven by private sector demand into the Singapore wholesale market. They will prove a model of deploying long cables in commercially financed timescales, right? The longest cable I'm aware of in ASEAN right now is 32K here in the Philippines, subsea cables. Most of them are very short. Java, Bali, 3K, Malaysia, Singapore, 3K. There's not much in the way of subsea cables. Nothing much has been built in the last 20 years. So if we want to develop an ASEAN grid, we need a regional subsea cable industry, which doesn't exist right now. So there's an economic driver, and there's an opportunity to use the Singapore projects to roll out an industry that doesn't yet exist. So I think I'm optimistic in that sense. Yeah. The regulatory side, I'll leave to others.
I mean, excellent responses from my co-panelists, and they, I think, have covered a lot of it. And I echo the point from Philip on how these Singapore import tenders will drive a supply chain that currently doesn't exist, which not only will enable a regional trade, but for countries like Indonesia, and I'm trying not to be politically incorrect here, but would kickstart an industry that will help them in a way bring cost of renewables within Indonesia. So today, the scale that Singapore is asking for with 7 import tender winners putting their project in Indonesia will need to meet the requirements of local content, which will drive the industry, manufacturing industry on panels, certain battery components, etc. in Indonesia. And when it comes to Indonesia deploying renewables for its own energy transition, can leverage on that sort of cross-subsidization of that industry, which is happening for the first set export to Singapore, which are more expensive, etc. So Singapore is paying for that start of domestic manufacturing industry, which will help Indonesia in the long run. So that's one on how this import and regional integrated project will also serve domestic markets of certain countries. But then the second one is there is so much diversity in resource capability. For example, I hinted that in my presentation, for example, Lao, which does not need so much power on its own, but is so resource rich, could act as a battery for Vietnam, where the power demand is skyrocketing, the need for power is urgent and quick, and intermittency of renewables has caused issues which we are all aware of. They could leverage on, okay, Lao, why don't you act as a battery for me using your pump hydro energy storage, and I generate and store it with your pump hydro and bring it back to Vietnam when time of need. I'll stop here, but I can add on follow-up questions when needed.
I think adding to what has already been discussed is kind of difficult, but I'll just make a few points, particularly in the South Asia region, right? I think a larger balancing area is always better, right? I mean, not only in terms of the type of resources that you could that you have access to, but say, for example, if you have a much bigger interconnection between Nepal and India, I think India has been struggling to add a lot of pumped hydro, right? And the sites that you have in other regions can kind of help India grow its renewables much faster. I think. But yeah, just on the point of pumped hydro, I think these projects take a lot of time, right? Uh, and we're still discussing whether it is pumped hydro, battery, what is going to come up, right? But you need storage now, right? And I do see the role of battery storage being much stronger in certain areas, particularly especially with the cost declines that we've seen in recent years, and also because of the difference in the round trip efficiency and the efficiency loss that you get with pumped hydro, right? I do see battery storage growing quite substantially in many of these regions.
Maybe I'll just add to that. I think both pump storage and the HVDC connections that would link them to places like Singapore are long lead items. So you're talking 10 years. So they should be planned, they should be started, but the other things will come in the meantime.
Thanks. And that's kind of a good point to conclude on. It's going to take 10 years. So how do we set in place, those technical standards and the ability to coordinate between different countries now for what we see coming in the future? Okay, so that leads us to a question that's coming from the audience. This is a technical one on BESS. Has any BESS project completed its life cycle yet in the world? If yes, what is the life achieved? If not, what can be the expected lifetime achievable with the current technology? The BESS experts.
I mean, so obviously there's battery applications that have been out there for more than a decade. You do refurbish batteries or potentially replace them after a decade anyway. I think I would make the point here that the industry is exploding, and it's different suppliers that are coming into the market now than would have been doing it before. As we see with PV module technology, what you're installing now is not what you installed 2 years ago. It changes. And so the lifetime and the durability of that new technology is subject to a discovery process, right? And that's enabled through the testing and the standards that we have to do accelerated life testing, to understand, can these products stand the test of time without waiting 10 years? Any BESS, you build in a sort of augmentation or replacement plan anyway, and there is the expectation that you will have operational capital expenditure to top up the capacity as you go. The other key thing is fire risk, and that's obviously a subject of increasing scrutiny and more tighter codes. Yeah.
Okay, can I invite any questions from the audience? Anyone who'd like to ask a question? Yeah, please, there's a microphone here. Is there a question? There's a microphone in the middle.
Hi, I'm Ridula from International Solar Alliance. I have a question about the retired batteries coming out from the EV sector and getting integrated into the solar sector. Is there any convergence on the standards for the secondary application of lithium batteries going into the solar industry? Thank you.
Who would like to take that?
That's maybe too specialist for the panel unless someone wants to contradict me. But what I would say is, I mean, that's an important area. And I think increasingly recycling and reconditioning batteries will become relevant. But I'd also just make the point per the graph with the scales. The scale of battery deployment that would be needed is hundreds of times what has been done in the past. So reuse of batteries is important, but it's actually a relatively small part of the current problem. It'll become much more relevant as time goes on and there's more of an installed base that can be reused.
Yeah. Just to add on to what Philip mentioned, so I think it's too specific for us to comment, but health and safety of, those kind of considerations coming out of recycled, repurposed batteries would play a very strong role. There would be obviously fire hazards, etc., that needs to be taken care of. So more than cost advantage, I think a lot of focus needs to go on risks that these repurposed batteries will pose and the suitability according to the locations they are put in. So that would increasingly become, and we don't want to leave bad examples, right? We are here trying to move towards energy transition, sustainability, at the same time, making sure that we are not wasting resources. So we are putting panels, recycling, battery recycling, repurposing, all of that, however, needs to take into account the risks that it possess, not leaving bad examples with deployment that creates more hesitancy on adoption of such technologies.
Maybe let me add one thought to that. I'm now in the industry for more than 20 years, and looking at development of BESS and technical standards for BESS, it reminds me pretty much of developments which we have seen in the PV industry as well as in the wind industries. So with growing numbers in production, and that's what we're seeing, and as Phil rightfully mentioned, the BESS industry is exploding currently. It's incredible to see the advancements and developments which are currently taking place there. This is actually driving the need for standardization, and that's unfortunately quite painful way of learning, but that's the we are not learning from past experience, obviously. That's the experience the industry is now undergoing, and so we will see definitely huge push towards certain standardization within the next 5 years. That's something I'm absolutely convinced of, and that will also then cater to second life applications and other, of course, very important points.
Thanks. Okay, I think we have another question. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hi, Grayson Hefner here with a question for the panel, and maybe start with Philip. So super impressed with this Terra Solar project. My goodness gracious, multi-billion-dollar co-located solar PV and BESS installation. I'm just wondering, in other places with this project that size, would it make sense to look at pumped hydro energy storage instead of BESS to be able to have a comparably huge, I mean, if you're talking billions of dollars, then that's the price range that maybe you can do a pumped hydro energy storage, and that might bring some relief anyway to the BESS supply chain, and maybe might be more appropriate in some parts of the ASEAN region like the Lower Mekong. Thank you.
Yeah, so I can start on that. So if you had pumped storage, you could achieve a much higher capacity factor, for sure. So that's 50% of the hours in the year. You could get it up to 80% easily if you had pumped storage hydro and the right amount of land to install the solar around it as well. Sometimes these projects are constrained by how much land have you got available to build enough solar to charge the energy storage, right? And that changes the economics that's possible. So I absolutely believe that Laos and Sarawak can continue to compete for the Battery of ASEAN title with real pump storage, with real energy storage, rather than just hydro generation. And that needs to be part of the solution. It will be cost effective, but it will take time. So in the meantime, solar BESS can be built.
Yeah, I would like to add, so while we all love the concept of pump hydro, right, it is, like I mentioned, domestically available, so you're not exposed to a supply chain there. It's low carbon in itself. It doesn't require any critical rare minerals, etc. But have to acknowledge these are huge construction undertakings. They're very long lead times, also because of the permitting and environmental and social studies that need to be undertaken, because again, we don't want to do things to do one right, we do another wrong. So extreme amount of caution and planning, execution is required, leading to long-term, right? But yes, overall, if you look at a long-term use and lifetime of these batteries, which will last 50 to 100 years in case of pump hydro, I think they'll be really cost-effective solutions. So I think the point is that the region needs to start doing it now, so that it's available 10 years when we, and this is no more a question or a discussion then.
Maybe one extra thing to point out, that slide around the off-river pump storage hydro opportunities, that's not really part of the discussion right now. Everyone's talking about converting existing river hydro schemes to be pump storage, to have 2 reservoirs, but including on cascades. But the off-river examples, like we have from Australia with the Kidston gold mine being converted to 2 mining pits, being converted to upper and lower reservoirs, there's a long way to go. It's the start of the discussion. It creates, again, a new opportunity, a new tool in the box, which isn't yet part of those regional plans.
I believe, just to add to what was just mentioned, I believe it's important. We have to start now, and only can stress this, but we should also try to avoid to play one technology or one solution against the other, because we need all of them. And only if we really join forces. And when taking reference to best storage, I was not saying it's and comparing it to pump hydro. I was not trying to say one is better than the other. We need both of them. And take into consideration that we have different timelines for implementation and development of these projects and making them or implementing them. That's the reason why we have to work on all sides and take the best out of all these options we have.
Thanks. Yeah, please go ahead.
Rare earth material is very much imperative to have this BESS. Has some study been done about what sort of natural resources we have at present vis-a-vis the technology available and how much it can sustain? The reason for asking this question by me is that only day before yesterday there was a news. I'm from India, and one of the leading auto manufacturer, has said that if this rare earth material issue is not going to get resolved very shortly, then probably down the line after 1 year, 1 month or 2 months, they have to shut their shop. They won't be able to produce any EV, and it is going to have the cascading effect on the chip manufacturing and other things. From the sustainability point of view, we always talk about the 3 R's: reduce, recycle, reuse. I don't know for this battery particularly, or the material which is used, how the thought is emerging at the global level to have these 3 R's in place. Thank you.
Okay, let's start with the resource question. When it comes to lithium, which is the main component for batteries these days, you're right. We see potential shortage in lithium supply, and setting up lithium mining is quite expensive, and it's also actually quite a dirty job, honestly, and all cost intensive. Here also we have to look into the technological development and progress. We are seeing sodium batteries coming to market, so we see their alternative in terms of materials. And this is going to diversify and release some or take some pressure from the supply chain. When it comes to reutilization, I would just like to mention one project that I got to know earlier today in a press release. It was implemented in Italy, in an Italian airport. Enel was commissioning a 10 megawatt battery, second life battery. So there are already movements in that direction, and we're coming back to the question of standardization. So second life, there are a couple of companies which are showing very promising approaches to second life installations, and that's definitely going to play an important role. Not necessarily for quick response solutions, as we require them for grid services, but when it comes to simpler storage applications, they definitely see the opportunity there.
So, this is a massively scaling industry, and there are going to be supply chain bottlenecks, right? As you see across the renewable energy industry, and offshore wind prices have gone up significantly recently because of supply chain bottlenecks around cables, around vessels. Solar prices went up before they came down. With the Germany Million Solar Roofs program created an industry, the prices went up before they went down, right? And I've actually been impressed that in the battery sector, you haven't seen that so far. What we've seen in the tenders we've been involved with is the prices have kept coming down. So there's not necessarily an industry-wide bottleneck on mineral resources to build the batteries. I can believe that individual companies might not have the right access to those minerals because they're not geographically distributed across all countries in even amounts. In this region, we're lucky that Indonesia has good mining resources and can build on that to create a battery supply chain. But I think the aggregate picture right now is that resource supply is keeping up with best supply. Whether it will continue to do so as best supply continues to ramp is a very good question.
Yeah, so just to add to that thought, it's a bit tangent to what we are talking now, but I mean, it pops up a thinking line in my head that eventually when we will end up recycling batteries, which will not require any additional mining, I anticipate there'll be a concept of green battery coming out very soon that, you know, why is my battery better than the other one? Because it's also a green battery, it's recycling. So with a green project, you will be having a green battery. I don't know if that'll demand a premium tomorrow, but I see that concept, you know, naturally flowing once, you know, this kind of trend will be observed.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think an interesting take on this whole supply thing when it comes to batteries, particularly, is the change in technology, right? I think with different technologies, you need a different mix of, you know, the elements that you use, the minerals that you use. So the whole transition from NMC to say LFP itself kind of changes what you know, supply chains are required now, right? You probably need less of certain minerals in you know, building out certain technologies, which is also interesting to see, especially if you know, see the evolution of sodium-based batteries, right? I mean, this is something that you know, the technology evolution is something that is also continuously evolving.
Thanks. I think we had a question here.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kiran Gupta from Tata Power India. So I want to know that it is good to understand we are talking of renewable energy integration. So any thoughts, or maybe in last 2.5 days, I have not heard on anything on the energy efficacy also. We talk of the integration, but what about the energy efficacy? For example, if we talk of the solar rooftop, so the delivery out of that is around 16 to 18%. So is any work or happening around how to increase the efficacy of the solar energy generation? Because a lot of work goes behind the scenes and we commission a plant, but it's only giving me around 18%, if I am correct with my database. Second, my point is that while we talk of this energy integration and maybe something if can be done on the energy efficacy assessment, what about the energy usage? As we are going to have different sources of renewable energy, that's good. But I think the usage of the existing energy, how efficient we are, that's equally important. Years back, we used to talk on the demand side management. A lot of work has been done in that area, and we were getting the ESCO studies done for the C&I commercial industrial customers. We talked, I heard on the open access customers. So they went on that. Now they are trying to, through the open access, they reach out to the renewable to get the cheapest energy. But I think, are we somehow, it's the need of the hour to go into the renewable and different sources. But are we leaving some thoughts or maybe pertinent actions required under the DSM? Because as we heard just now, 3R approach, I think that still it would remain relevant in all the times and in all the eras of energy generation. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think, yeah, this session is focused on integration. I think absolutely demand side management is part of that, which we haven't focused on today. I think energy efficiency will be part of other sessions. Just to come to your first point around the efficiency of solar. So I think there's two critical concepts here. There's the conversion efficiency of the panel itself, which used to be 18%, but now you can get into the mid-20s quite easily. And then there's the load factor, which is the graphs we all had on screen earlier of how many hours per year are you dispatching, right? Which fundamentally depends on the solar resource, how sunny is it, and then can be extended with the batteries or the other energy storage. So if we talk about efficiency for the panel, in a way, it's not important in the same way it is with a fossil fuel. Because of the fossil fuel, you're paying for it, there's environmental costs to extracting it. All we mean with the efficiency of a solar panel is how much you take your free resource, the sunlight, and convert it. It's really a measure of the space requirement of a solar panel, right? If you've got a higher efficiency, you can get more energy out of the same amount of space. So it's about the efficiency of the land footprint. So it's a very different conversation than when we talk about thermal conversion efficiencies of fossil fuels. And that is improving all the time. And there's a big pipeline. I think we had a graph on the screen showing the pipeline of technology improvements. So maybe I'll hand over on that point. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know Phil mentioned there's another session on energy efficiency demand side, but just to link it to batteries and the role so rooftop solar, in my opinion, will play a very strong role in driving the behavior, energy efficiency and demand side. And especially residential rooftop, right? If I, as a consumer, put up panels on my rooftop and it's generating during the day and it is very cost effective not to buy from the grid and use that, I will automatically start shifting my load during that time. So I'll run my machine that time. I'll, do all the high electricity. I mean, obviously the necessary things between 6 to 8 in the morning and in the evening, which are peak hours, will still happen. However, I would intentionally start to shift load when my rooftop solar is generating. And that would not be very different for CNI if they are able to meet most of their consumption through their own corporate PPA. Batteries coming in and integrating renewables during peak hours, I believe would address that behavior as well. But the utilities are also trying to manage it by way of that battery introduction, right? So, okay, you can encourage as much behavior by demand side management and certain incentives, but there are some critical processes that will still fall into the peak hour. So one example from India that I really like are the FDRE tenders. This is not just, okay, I slap a battery into my project and I'm doing great. It is actually designed to meet a certain load pattern. So it is designed to address the question of high peak demand in the morning and evening hours. So 6 to 8 in the morning, 6 to 8 in the evening. And, there's a load curve. The sector has to respond to that load curve, provide me 90% firm power during those hours. And, whether the private sector answers it by way of a solar plus wind combination, a solar plus battery, wind plus battery, or all three of them is up to the private sector. But you're answering the question at that peak hour. So I'm generating during the day, but it's not needed. I'll store it and I will provide you firm power during the evening. So in my opinion, the tenders are designed quite nice in a way to solve a problem. An equation is not okay, I have, I'm just slapping a battery because, that's, okay, I have firm power, but it is to solve a load curve problem.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think that's an interesting problem because I also feel that DSM is something that is severely underutilized. And if you look at the marginal cost, if you look at this hourly for any distribution utility, you know that there are the marginal cost differences if reflected in the energy price could create the right incentive mechanisms. And just to put the number if you look at it from the perspective of battery storage, right? So for India, if you look at it, the cost of storing one unit of electricity and then using it afterwards is somewhere around 4.5 to 5 rupees, depending on what cost you take, right? Do we see that much variation when it comes to something like time of day tariffs, right? Probably not. And I think people, I don't think, are incentivized enough to change certain patterns. I think the storage cost itself could be a right indicator of identifying what should be the compensation mechanisms, right? It should definitely be more than what we have today, I guess.
Thank you. I see a lot of hands up, but unfortunately, we're very close to time, and I know we're standing between you and lunch. So maybe just to conclude, if I can ask each of the panelists, what are the one or two things that you'd like this audience to take away from the session today? Maybe we start with you, Jens, and then move down.
My key takeaway would be we definitely need to look into the specific challenges, and we need to try to target tailored solutions. Take into account what we have, the resources available in terms of technology, financial, as well as also skilled labor. So that would be my takeaway. We have to strive for tailored solutions.
So I was really trying to give profile to that solar BESS can now be mid-merit, and by mid, and that's a market term, but here in the Philippines it would mean 45 to 65% capacity factor. This is now a possible solution that wasn't possible before. It's a tool in the bag that everyone else can use and affects our overall energy system planning. So tell people about the project, please.
I think for me, it's a little bit more high-level macro view that 100% renewables is a solved problem. We are no more, we should not have any more hesitancy about how this will be achieved. There are various tools and technologies now available to that goal. It again brings us to how we were talking 10 years ago about solar and wind. By creating that enabling ecosystem across having a national ambition with some targets which are derived out of proper modeling on demand, new sectors that are contributing to that demand from digitalization, industrial decarb, data centers, etc. So a proper demand planning on and setting a national ambition to actually putting together an enabling regulatory and policy framework, transmission upgrade to financing and investment landscape. So working across that enabling environment to really translate into what private sector delivery models would only talk about land, PPA, transmission, right? So to come down to the delivery level and make it a smooth delivery, I think we need that enabling and framework for batteries as well now.
I think just to add to, yeah, I agree with most of those points. Just to add to that, I think the point is that we don't need 24/7 renewables with a lot of battery storage today, right? We don't need that. But what we definitely need is storage coming up along with some amount of VRE, whether it is pump storage or battery storage. Because before we know it, we'll hit constraints that would actually slow down the growth that we've seen in recent years when it comes to solar and wind particularly. So yeah, I think storage targets are required, in the same line as variable renewable targets. So I think that's my take.
Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists. We have a giant red light flashing at us right now. That means it's time for lunch. So if we can have a quick round of applause for everyone here on stage. Thank